Okay, great. Oh my gosh, immediately so many people.
Good.
Hi, everyone. You are in the right place. We're just holding for a moment to make sure everybody gets in the room on time. Go. Okay, we can start. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Politics in Prose Live. I'm Beth Wong on the events team at PNP. We thank you so much for joining us here to celebrate the release of Breathe, a new novel by Joyce Carol Oates. This event is proudly in partnership with Books and Books and Harvard Bookstore, so if your ticket is from one of those places, you are in the right place tonight. At any time during our event, you can click on the link that I'm going to put in the chat in just a moment to purchase copies of tonight's book from our stores. In addition to growing your own library, a book sale from an indie bookstore means that we're able to keep bringing our communities content like this, content of which we are so proud, and that's really vital to our communities. You can ask our author a question tonight by submitting it to the Q&A box, the button for which can be found at the bottom of your screens. Be sure to submit it in the Q&A and not in the chat to make sure the author and moderator see it. Tonight, we're offering live auto captioning. I've enabled it, and to turn that on or off, you go to the closed caption button below or the settings of your Zoom mobile app. I will waste no more time getting to the main event. It is my honor to introduce the inimitable Joyce Carol Oates in conversation with author and artist Jonathan Sandrof to discuss her powerful new novel, Breathe. Joyce Carol Oates is a recipient of the National Medal of Humanities, the National Book Critics Circle Ivan Sandrof Lifetime Achievement Award, the National Book Award, and the PEN Malamud Award for Excellence in Short Fiction, and has been several times nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. She has written some of the most enduring fiction of our time, including the national bestsellers We Were the Mulvaneys, Blonde, and the New York Times bestseller, The Falls. She is the Roger S. Berlind Distinguished Professor of the Humanities at Princeton University and has been a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters since 1978. Oates will be in conversation with Jonathan Sandrof. His debut novel, The Death Artist, was an international bestseller, a People magazine page turner of the week, and is currently in development at Fox, along with his second and third novels. Jonathan created the Crime Fiction Academy as the Center for Fiction. His new novel, The Last Mona Lisa, was named one of the best books of summer by People and received 2-starred reviews. Welcome to you both. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Beth. It's great to be here with Joyce Carol Oates, who is an inspiration to so many of us, to so many writers, so many readers. I have to say, Joyce, I have so many things to ask you about this book. You can see, everyone, if you can see this, that I have Post-its like a lunatic throughout the whole book. But the book is so haunting and beautiful. And I thought I'd start by saying something about the title. You use the word breathe as a kind of propulsive force from the very beginning throughout the book. I kind of thought, and I wonder how you feel about this, that it was as if you're bringing the reader in to breathe along with Michaela, the main character, in an attempt to save her husband's life or to save a life. You know, it was a very physical kind of thing. Do you have a thought about that?
Yes, I should, really emphasize the setting. Those of us from the East are accustomed to a certain kind of landscape. When I look out the window, the tree line is very close. It's almost overwhelming. But when you're in the West, the vista is enormous. It's as if you're looking into like a lunar landscape. And the other disorienting or just destabilizing element is that when we go to places like the characters go to a place called Santa Tierra, which is like Santa Fe. At 7,000 feet, we're actually not able to breathe very normally. Not quite enough oxygen gets to our brains. So the emphasis on breathing is something that is very visceral. You arrive there, you're in a different landscape. It looks very different from what you're accustomed to. it's as if when you go out into the desert, you're looking into not just space, but through time. You know, you're looking into a landscape that seems almost prehistoric. So my characters come from the East, from a world like my own, but then they're really destabilized almost immediately.
Now, you know, you bring up the landscape. I kept thinking that everything in the book, the landscape, the weather, the fierce wind, the lack of air at a high altitude, even the frightening sculptures in their house, you know, you're creating a world that seems a reflection of what the wife is going through. Would you say that that weather and that landscape become important characters to you in the book? Because I think they, you know.
Yes, and I should sort of disclose that Jonathan actually had read an earlier version of the novel, not too different, but also Jonathan knows the emotional autobiographical background of the novel. So it's like emotional autobiography. There is a fictional story, but basically a lot of this actually happened to me in March and April 2019, when my husband was ill and eventually passed away. So I'm sort of, it's almost like a memoir that's been given a fictitious language. Not everything that happened to me is in the novel. And not everything that's in a novel happened to me. It is selective and imaginative. I think the profound experience of our lives when we lose someone we love very much is this terrifying helplessness that you can't really help the person. You know, you can't keep the person alive, and it seems like you're trying so hard to do something that actually can't be done. And then when you fail at that, there's a sort of residue, a sense of guilt and helplessness. And you do feel like Michaela, she does feel that her life is kind of left over. It's like a posthumous life.
Well, she says in the book, there's a chapter, I think it's titled Missing. And that whole idea that when you lose someone, something of you is lost with it, because that way that people, your partners and the people you love reflect you. You know, I mean, there is this quality throughout the book that I want to just say, this is, you know, of course I know you and I knew Charlie very well. And so in a certain way, the book was difficult for me because I felt the pain of it, but you also did transport me into these characters. I believed in them. You know, I stopped at a certain point seeing you and Charlie, and I saw this couple, this younger couple, in this totally destabilized situation, which I thought, well, that's the gift of that a writer does, to transform something into something more universal, right?
Yes, I think, and when we have extreme experiences, we're sort of forced or almost catapulted out of our subjectivity, so that we are individuals with our personalities and our memories. But then these profound things happen to us that we cannot control in any way. And I consider them transpersonal. I mean, the most obvious is being born. Our births are something that happen to us. We can't remember our births. And I guess death would be that way too. Those are transpersonal experiences that happen without our volition or our comprehension. We can't control it. And losing somebody very close to you, you know, losing someone who's actually right with you, you're holding this person, probably is the most profound.
Whoops. Have we lost Joyce there for a moment?
I think we might have. It looks like she was having a power issue.
Wow.
In the meantime, there are some people asking in the chat about how to turn on and off closed captions. I'll address that very quickly. At the bottom of your screen, if you're on a desktop Zoom, there is a closed caption button, and you can toggle it on and off there with a little arrow. Or if you're on a Zoom app, you'll have to go into your settings on that app to toggle off closed captions.
Maybe Joyce can simply reboot.
Yes.
That would be my suggestion. And if you want, I'll try and do a song and dance with people while we wait.
Yes.
Yes.
That sounds great. I will try and communicate with her on the back end.
Okay, so I'm still on, right? So everyone, I'm sorry, Joyce will be back. And it's very interesting for me because I've known Joyce for a long time. And she is one of our most prolific writers. I'd say she is our person of letters. She has become that, and I've read so many of the books and the plays and poems that she's written, and yet each time, and I think if you are a fan of Joyce's work, which so many people are, you notice that she has this tremendous ability to kind of become a different kind of writer in different books. And that's what always amazes me, because so many writers, actors, whomever, are always the same. Joyce is not always the same. I wish I could see you people, and that we weren't all isolated in our little things, so that I could answer your questions while we regain Joyce, who I hope we will very, very shortly. There are a lot of questions I have for Joyce, and I'm sure you have questions for Joyce as well. I'm looking at questions coming in here, but let's see. Isn't it bad when it's like suddenly you're the understudy, when you go to a play, as we all did in the old days, and they announce at the beginning that the star isn't going to be there, and their understudy's taking over, and then the whole audience goes, "Oh," that's the way I feel, I mean, what can I do, right? Yeah, Joyce will be back, really and truly. Let's hope the technology I hope there's no sort of weird blackout in Princeton. I don't see why. It's a fine night here. Would you like to discuss, what is this? Waiting pay. Okay, how are we doing?
Hi, sorry. I have been in contact with her publicist, and we're gonna get her back on.
Okay, good. Right. Somebody just said, who has a great sense of humor, waiting for the song and dance. You really don't want me to do that. I'm just chatting about, I'll chat more about Joyce's work. I'm looking at it in front of me in my library, and Blonde is right in front of me. Joyce and I did a discussion on the 20th anniversary of Blonde, which is her Marilyn Monroe epic book, which is a very hallucinatory, very, I don't know, like a kind of profound and crazy and sad and brilliant exploration of being inside a character's mind, this one being Marilyn Monroe. I remember when Joyce was writing it, she said,
Hi.
Yes? You back?
Hello?
Hello? What's happening?
Back. Part of the house doesn't have any electricity.
Oh, okay, I hear you, Joyce.
Part of the house doesn't have.
Oh,
I
no.
think I'm on a generator, maybe.
You're back. Yay.
Can you see me? I can see you.
Thank goodness, Joyce, because I was running out of my songs and dances. So
Well, I'm in a different room with a different computer, so.
Okay, great.
I think what happened was that part of the house lost its power. I'm on a generator now.
Wow. Well, Anyway, I had something in my mind that I wanted to ask you. You might think this is really crazy, but 2 or 3 times during the book, I was reminded, or I started thinking about Allen Ginsberg's amazing poem, Howl. And in reading Howl, the reader howls along with him. And I kept thinking that Michaela, in your novel, is creating a kind of howl. She even does a howl-like poem at one point about hospice and honeymoon. I mean, does that seem so off the wall to you that?
Well, I wasn't thinking particularly of Allen Ginsberg, but he does have this famous poem, Kaddish.
Yeah.
Kaddish. Yeah, like a lament for somebody that
Yeah.
we've lost.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's just a kind of momentum in your book, but why don't we go back? I want you to talk because the people out there are so sick of me because you weren't here. And
It was so funny because just as I was speaking, all the electricity went out and everything went black. And then a minute later, I couldn't get on the internet. But as I said, I'm in a well, one of the elements in the novel, which maybe you identify with, Jonathan, is that our experiences are so profound because they are really beyond our volition and our comprehension. And we can think in metaphorical terms, like we don't believe in ghosts. Most of us don't believe in ghosts, but yet we are haunted. And parts of our brains, our neurons are firing with memory. And when we have dreams, we are catapulted into this other world in which the dead are still alive. And they have a strong gravitational pull on us. And it's enormously powerful and more real, I think, than the real world.
Yeah, I mean, people always say, and it sounds like a cliche, that we carry our losses with us and the people we lose, but it's absolutely true. And I think in this book, in Breathe, Michaela is, the whole time that she's struggling and trying to not believe what's going to happen. She is holding on. In fact, at one point you say something about how I marked it, but now I'll never find it, about how hope is such a sort of fiction, which is part of this book, I think, right? The idea of hope and not believing the reality of what we see.
Yeah, I was particularly struck by being haunted and sort of focusing on the kind of gothic or surreal elements in our natural psychic lives. Not looking at something that's extraordinarily mythological, but just something in ordinary life, that we do experience. This looking for the deceased one who has been beloved and looking for that person in the world and seeing people who are sort of like that person, thinking of the alternative life that might have brought us to that person.
Right. And Michaela, actually, after her husband dies, keeps having she has recurring dreams where there's a phone message that tells her he hasn't died, and all of these things that are rather ghost-like, we could say, and metaphysical, right? Yeah.
And you remember that story that I wrote after I had visited you about people who are in a lake, upstate New York, and the lake is sort of unnaturally warm, so it's not freezing in the winter as much as it used to. So there are microorganisms in that water that may be injurious if the water comes up one's nose if you're swimming in it. So I was thinking about the environmental element, speaking of the transpersonal, that the couple comes from the East, but if you read the novel from a certain point of view, it's quite possible that they're both infected when they come out West.
Right.
That something has happened, that our environments now are turning alien to us, something that we've been doing for decades, like swimming in a lake in upstate New York in the mountains. Suddenly, one summer in the climate change world, that act that seems so familiar and ordinary may be lethal, right. That our environment's no longer the same it's not stable.
Right. And that haunts her throughout the book about going into her ear or this microorganism. And yes, I kept thinking about this, that after you visited me and then I could never go back in the lake, that was it for me. But
that's probably just as well.
Yeah.
But the idea that our environments that have been so, in a sense, protective of us now are destabilized, and we're not really sure what they're doing. When I was this is a story very much that took place in Berkeley, and a place of lots of hills. And then I was in Santa Fe. So the West, I think of the West as somewhat different from being on the East Coast. But one thing that happened to me, I had something strange in my ear. I mean, I was sort of not feeling that I was walking normally, and my balance was off. So I went to this urgent care facility, which is sort of replicated in the novel. And a tick had burrowed into my ear. And so some of these things that are, possible, they sound like such horrible nightmares, and yet how possible and, how likely this could have been, and you're told, well, this is awfully close to your brain, you're really lucky that you came in when you did. So I was writing about that also.
Yeah, there's so many, I mean, the novel goes back and forth in time. Also, we see the couple earlier, we see them coming to this new place. We see moments when they've just met. So that we learn about them sort of further on in the book, the more we go with it. They're in, as I said to you before, it felt like everything, this whole world, this whole nightmare that she's caught in is reflected in everything, even, I'm trying to get to a point, Joyce, to ask you something, okay? Which is that your prose often finds beauty in ugliness and uses it. And it's something I am very, very, very interested in. One of my favorite works of art is the Ischenheim altarpiece, Grunwald's Suffering Christ on the cross, where he's dying and rotting. And it's just the most amazing painting. And I think that you find your work a beauty in pain, and how you work. How do you do that? How do you think about that? Do you think about it?
Well, I guess it has to do with the intensity. And sometimes there are characters in fiction that seem to us really negative and evil and terrible people. But there is something about the intensity of the experience of being confronted with them. It sort of raises us to another level of the human experience. Mm. When we're in a protective environment, like many of us have been doing things with Zoom rather than actually traveling, where we are safe in a sense, but we're sort of missing out on many of the adventures of life, which sometimes propel us towards something that's frightening and terrifying. And our lives are sort of mediating between that which is safe for us and then that which is really, really a challenge.
Yeah. And do you, I don't, the weird thing about these mediated, Zoom is that it's both incredibly intimate. It's like you're in my living room, but at the same time, it's performative and it's totally somehow not real. But can I just go back to, like, there's all these things in the hospital with the husband that we see and that are certainly not pretty, but the prose is so beautiful and becomes kind of this poetry of this pain and leading to death that, it's haunting it's that idea that I was curious about, because the body plays a big part in this book and in many of your books. Would you agree? The idea of the body and what happens to it, and
yeah, I'm very interested in the human brain and some of the foibles, the deceptions that maybe you could call them delusions or hallucinations that we experience, the lapses in memory, the phenomenon of memory itself. So when I'm writing about characters, I'm often writing about philosophical ideas or neurological ideas, and oh, the lights are coming back on. I can tell the light, it just got brighter here. Like I have a generator and that maybe went off and the lights, not that anybody cares about this, but I don't know what it looks like. Anyway, the more light, But the other side of the novel is, and I know that this is true for you, as it is maybe for other people who have lost loved ones, that the grieving is very raw and very visceral. And one of the things that we lose when we lose a loved one is that capacity of loving that person and caring for that person, especially if the person has been ill. You're really caring for the person, trying to keep him alive. And so after that is over with, that's a profound drama. But then we still have this yearning and need to be caring, quote unquote, absolutely caring and sort of selfless is still in us. It's still the instinct. Right. So in the novel, Michaela does encounter a former student of hers who isn't altogether well. He has a chronic condition, a respiratory condition. He would never be altogether well. He'll never get too much worse. It's one of these ongoing conditions. So he gives her a letter and she doesn't really want to open it, but she doesn't throw it away. So I was thinking that there was a life beyond the novel, that when the novel ends, actually, if she goes back home to the East, she'll take the letter with her. It's possible that they will have a friendship. It will be probably a platonic friendship. It won't be a romantic friendship, and she wouldn't be marrying him. But she still has that need and the desire to help somebody, even though she's sort of flattened and broken at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up, for me, the novel, there's so much about husbands and wives in this. The wife as a caregiver, the husband as a patient. It brings up a lot about women and men and husbands and wives. And there was a line in the book where she thinks, to underman a man's pride, you risk injuring his vanity, and a man is his vanity. Can you talk a little bit about the roles that husband and wives are assigned, or they play, these caregiver? It was so fascinating to me.
Well, I've done different presentations of that relationship. So this is a very specific relationship where the woman is, she really loves the husband a little more than he loves her. Not that there's anything wrong with him, but he maybe doesn't have quite the capacity. But she's quite willing and really happy to love him more than he loves her. And at the same time, I didn't want the novel to seem as if, if you look at some of the chapters that are italicized and between the longer chapters, it's quite possible that Michaela is the one who's ill. And there is this talk about, somebody says, take my hand, I will not abandon you. Right. It's quite possible that maybe she is the one in the fever state. So I wanted to write a novel that could be read as a realistic novel in more or less, chronological way. But it also could be read from another point of view, that it's like a fever dream, and that basically she is the one who's ill, and he's the one who says, I will never abandon you.
That's interesting, because the book does go back and forth in that way, between a very realistic depiction and at the same time, this fevered dream. I also wanted to say that in your book, it's a husband and wife, but I don't think the relationships you talk about are at all exclusive to men and women, or, any kind of gender roles. I mean, any same-sex relationships, anything, everyone goes through these kinds of dependencies, independencies. And I think that that's where the book goes into a kind of universal idea that's so important, that everyone can relate to. Right?
Yes, and I wrote it before the COVID-19. I wrote it before our pandemic and lockdown. So this terrible fear that we'll die all alone in some room on a ventilator and nobody from your family can even get in, and that kind of horrible trauma, which I think our society is going to have to absorb, for years. It's kind of already in the novel. Like a hand is gripping yours, whoever it is urging you, breathe, and saying, I will never abandon you. And those words, I think, are the most important words anyone can say to us, I will never abandon you.
Yeah. And it's really what the character's trying to come to grips with realistically throughout the novel. I also, before we go to some questions, I thought you started to talk about the different chapters and sometimes the poetic small chapters. I wondered how you structured this book, because you've done this before with lots of small titled chapters in between longer prose narrative ones. Do you write them separately and then reorder them at times, or how do you do that?
I don't know why I have this predilection now. It's not necessarily anything I did much in the past. I like the idea of a realistic novel that can be read as realism. But then I like to go through and sort of chip away at it and insert some other perspective. Say you're living your life right now, but then when you were, say, a few years from now, you're looking back at the life and you have like two different perspectives on your own life. That makes any sense? Or there's an alternative reality where time is actually very different.
Oh, we're losing you again.
Of pure imagination, where you really do have to help your deceased loved one sort of crossing over into death, that you can't abandon the loved one immediately. You have to stay with that loved one.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that those smaller sort of poetic chapters reinforce that mix of realism and emotion, or surrealism at times? There are some,
Yeah. Yes, I had intended that, like these voices out of a fever cloud. If we were in an intensive care unit, you would be sort of hallucinating. You wouldn't really know what was going on. You would think you would know. You might be dreaming, but then you really don't know what's going on. So we could all be in this hallucination. And I think that we've gone through, as a collective society, through a kind of general trauma with the pandemic, where our sense of reality is often very shaken. Yeah. We don't really know as much as we did in the past.
But it's interesting because you wrote this pre-pandemic. So
yeah, I did, but there are toxins in the air and water and the soil. I mean, so it's kind of part of the pandemic is a consequence of
right.
climate change, I think.
Yeah.
There'll be more viruses that are multiplying and are very potent because they're not dying out the way they used to because of climate change. So it's all one atmospheric whole.
This book, I don't know, it also reminded me of some of the later novels of Philip Roth, which look very unflinchingly at death. Would you agree with that at all?
Well, that's a possibility. Yeah. As I said, it's based on my own experience. And so as we move toward the transpersonal experiences, I guess we probably, share them with many, many other people.
Right.
I'm sorry there isn't more humor in this novel. I used to have some Black humor or some kind of humor, but I think probably there's not much of it in this novel.
No, I don't think you want it. I mean, this novel, like any really good novel, has a mood, it has a cloud, it has an atmosphere, and we don't want to break this up with humor. It wouldn't work. I mean, I think what you do, though, is you have other stories that filter in and reinforce it, like the story with her student, Letitia, who has been raped, which is astonishingly terrible story. But Michaela's also trying to help her and can't help her, you know?
Yeah.
So
Well, she does help her in a way just by being, just by listening.
yeah.
And it turns out not to be so bad. It's not so tragic as one thinks. But I wonder how many people who have lost a loved one, who are very traumatized, I wonder how many of those people actually become reckless with their lives, as if they feel that they should punish themselves or even commit suicide in some, indirect or oblique way. There's such a strong residue of guilt. I've heard people say to me, how can I walk along the shore on this nice bright day when my wife or my husband is dead? This is not fair. But these are the thoughts that go through, I think, a normal person who's grieving.
I think it's very hard to allow yourself to enjoy things in life when you have had a tremendous loss, and you have to sort of crawl your way back to life and enjoying those things without that guilt. It's I think I felt that in some way she is moving toward some kind of forgiveness and to another place. I mean, you give us these glimmers of another life to come. So
right. If she cares for someone else, her caring is a part of her spiritual, destiny. So she can't just turn that off.
Right. Yeah. I know, and she's it's funny. I was about to say she's a very living, breathing character. But so is Gerard. He's because we go back and forth and glimpse him, and we glimpse him through her as we. Yeah, anyway, I think maybe there are I can go to some questions nobody's told, and let's see what people have to ask you. Let's see.
You can ask anything.
Somebody's asking me, how do I interpret my own personal experience is in response to your work? Well, I don't know. Somebody else says, why don't you talk about the writing of mystery and thrillers? Joyce Carol Oates has that great Gothic thread throughout her work. And you have written, and you've actually very recently worked a mystery, and also you have that group of stories that are all kind of mystery stories,
Oh, yes. Well, I don't think that the surreal aspect of our lives, which manifests itself most visibly and dramatically in dreams, I don't think that that's any less real. It's a neurological phenomenon where you're dreaming at night. That's basically a real experience, even though it's subjective. Mm-hmm. So roughly 1/3 of our lives, I think, is spent unconscious. Maybe with some people it's more, but that's part of our life, the subjective life. And so working with ghosts, seeing the Gothic as kind of metaphorical, I don't think it's pushing or it's a stretch. I think it's still psychologically very valid.
And I would normally never ask this question, but you just said it. Do you ever use things that are from dreams that you use then in your work?
I have used some dream images only 2 or 3 times. They're actually very difficult. They're very difficult to use dream images. Somehow they seem more difficult to me than just making things up, Yes, I have a few times. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of dream imagery and dreams actually in Breathe in this book for the characters, so that it adds to this kind of both real and surreal quality to the story. It's interesting that you say we spend a big part of our lives unconscious. So,
Yes.
I mean, it just hit me that, like I'm always one of those people who just wants to wake up. I don't sleep well, and and then I'm always happy to be awake somehow. So maybe I'm denying my unconscious life. I don't know.
Well, it probably manifests itself in ways that you can't control. But one of the elements of the novel I wanted to explore is Michaela going out to the West and encountering these deities or demons, the Aboriginal gods that were there, have been there in the Southwest for thousands of years, and white people from the East Coast of America come out to the Southwest and are coming into this landscape that's very primeval and primitive, and in a way beyond, it's prehistoric, So she's encountering these, well, Christians would call them pagan gods, but they're just the gods of that world. I made up those particular gods, but there are many others like that. Like one of them is a prankster god. Native American people have a variety of gods, and one of them is a prankster. Mm-hmm. And the prankster is sort of amoral. I think in Christianity, the saints are all good, and Jesus and Mary are born without original sin. Christianity focuses on goodness, and then there's a devil and some demons who take care of the bad things, but they're not the gods. But there are other religions, like I believe Hinduism, where a god of creation is also a god of destruction. So it's like accepting the fact that creation also has destruction in it. So when Michaela encounters these demons that are little artifacts and sculptures in her house, this rented house, she's sort of appalled by them. Sometimes they look as if they're obscene. They're creatures that we're not accustomed to in, polite society.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that was, as I said before, interesting because it's so much a part of this world you're creating, but also, that mythology and life and death of the myths as well that she encounters. I moved in, the book brought me to some really wild, different places. I'm just going to throw something out. You're going to say, well, he's nuts. But, I spent my life in the movies. And when she's climbing the bell tower near the end, I could not help but think about Hitchcock's Vertigo, which is a movie that is entirely about death. And, it's Jimmy Stewart is recreating this dead woman, and of course, everybody has seen Vertigo, but he can't do it, you can't do it. And it's kind of, I always think of your writing anyway as very cinematic, even when I'm not talking about specific cinema, but,
Well, Vertigo is, I think, even more about the projection of a fantasy.
True.
The Kim Novak character is somebody with long red hair, and she's more like an ordinary person, but the object of the fantasy, Brunel would call it that obscure object of desire.
Right.
It's like the fantasy image. I think Hitchcock is really working more with that. And then, of course, the woman herself probably has to be destroyed because she can't possibly be the bearer of these fantasies.
Well,
I wasn't necessarily thinking of that. I was probably just thinking.
I'm sure, I often think that the writers, the artists, you're not responsible for the things that come off into other people's minds, and which is the good thing. There's that wonderful Marcel Duchamp essay called The Creative Act. And he always says the last part of the creative act is the viewer, is the reader, is what that person does to interpret your work.
Well, I'll tell you one thing which might interest you because you're a writer of mystery and suspense. I have a novel called The Tattooed Girl, and I very deliberately use that aerial shot at the end of Psycho. You remember the camera? First, the camera, of course, is almost always vertical. I mean, it's horizontal, and we're seeing people, at our height. But then at a crucial point, which I think the violins are going crazy, it's like shrieking. The camera goes up in the air and we have an aerial shot of this creature coming in, stabbing. I guess, I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the creature in the chair. Anyway, the camera is no longer horizontal, so we're up in the air. So I very deliberately used a scene like that where the perspective becomes aerial. And I use that near the end of the tattooed girl. That was very deliberate.
Oh, it's like a change of point of view. You know what you're talking about in Psycho, because I'm such a Hitchcock freak. But in that scene when the detective comes, Hitchcock goes above so that the mother comes out to kill him. But
right.
Wonderful Hitchcock Truffaut book. And Hitchcock says the reason he did it was not for any metaphysical great reason. He did it so that the audience couldn't see the face of this person. He wanted to hide the identity.
Oh, of course.
But it works so well. As we know,
Yeah.
to change the point of view, it suddenly changes everything,
Well,
So-
of course, but we don't know when we're watching the movie. That's why the director did it. I mean, we figure it out later, but it's so fast in the moment. It's suddenly we're shrieking, the music is crazy and we're sort of up in the air. And that makes it really a profound experience because it's so unexpected.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to subvert this entire conversation because before the pandemic, I went to see at Film Forum Psycho because I'd never seen it on the big screen and it's amazing. But I'm going to take I'm going to take a question here. I wonder if I wonder if Joyce might tell us about the intellectual and emotional process of moving from a personal experience, such as losing a husband, to the literary experience of writing a book on the subject. How do you move from one to the other?
Well, I'm very naturally interested in philosophical ideas. I mean, that really predates this novel. So I'm interested in human memory. And there's one little chapter in the novel where the husband says that he doesn't dream. Some people say they don't dream, and then the answer is, well, you don't remember your dreams. But then the answer is, if I don't remember them, I actually haven't dreamt. And there's some talk about anesthesia. We experience something, our brains are not dead during anesthesia. Our brains are not stopped. The brain is still alive and it must be having dreams and thoughts or something. But when you wake up from anesthesia, you don't remember any of it. Right. Some people think that you're feeling pain actually, but you're paralyzed and can't really express it. But if you don't remember the pain, did you really experience it?
You actually talk about that in the book, very specifically.
Yeah, those are the thoughts that I'm interested in, irrespective of my own experience. I find those very interesting.
So when you write out of such a personal experience like this, I think what people are often want to know is how can one possibly write about, something so devastating and painful. And I think it's what artists do. I mean, what happens as you write that, Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think a person is so haunted by the material, you can't really write about anything else. I remember after my father died in 2000, and I remember thinking I can write about the death of a father for the rest of my life. There was something so emotionally devastating about it that there was no way that one wouldn't be able to write about it. I mean, it's like poetry usually springs from the human heart, and people are writing about things that matter to them.
Right. Yeah. I think that's really true that, you could write about it forever. You can rethink it because it is something you carry with you.
And you wrote a memoir. You wrote The Widower's Notebook that was something that you probably had to write?
Yeah, I didn't intend to write it. I didn't really want to write it. I couldn't write anything else. And
That's it.
you know,
That's it. You couldn't write anything else. I mean, you're not going to write a comic novel. I mean, you have to write about something that you're thinking about and you're actually dreaming about, and it's sort of settled over your whole consciousness. You have to write about that. Maybe after a while you move on and you've kind of, exhausted that.
Yeah. Well, I think we have both done that. I mean, A Widow's Story, and there are echoes of it in this novel, but quite differently. But I think you're right that profound loss keeps haunting us, keeps coming back, keeps becoming other kinds of things in our work. And as it's funny. I just want to write something comic, but doesn't quite happen.
Yeah. I would like to also, writing comic plays is a little easier than writing comic prose, where people are having dialogue. That's a little easier to be funny.
Yeah. I'm gonna look and see about the questions. It's hard to do this. This person asks, is there one or more turning points in the novel? And how do you come to a turning point? In other words, a big change in the book. I think the book is broken into sections. That goes back to maybe the way you structure the book, right?
Yeah, well, we do go through phases in our lives. Like you come to the end of something sort of psychologically. It was thought that you could somehow keep your beloved person, your spouse, alive, but that didn't work, and it was failure. And then the next phase of your life is you're trying to be a responsible citizen. There are many things that have to be done after somebody dies, and they have to do with, with the law, with bank accounts, with all sorts of things that are very mundane. And so widows and widowers spend time doing that, as if that were something that one could do. I mean, it's something that you have to do, most people. And so you do it. So that's like another phase. And then sometimes you think that you're all over the grief and you're moving on, but then it comes back like a great wave, like a tidal wave. And it sort of like picks you up and throws you down, so that you had thought you were stronger than you actually were. So all these are kind of phases that you can kind of collate with a story, because there is a story. I mean, there is a story.
And you do it in the novel because you have demarcations, or post-mortem, what happens then, but you keep going back. Those tidal waves of emotion also come back and forth into the story and the way, right?
Yeah, and I think that because we are all caring people and we want to be loving people, I think if somebody needs our help, we are going to be there for them and forget about our personal feelings. There's something about the human spirit in an emergency, where some people will be heroic. I mean, you could drag your broken leg along and help somebody. You wouldn't have done it without the emergency, but you can rise to that level. So I tend to think that people can be heroic. And that's what leads us to writing about people in extreme situations, that they can dramatize what's deepest in them. And maybe it's not so subjective, it's more like transpersonal. I mean, most people, I think, would rise to the occasion of helping someone else in an emergency.
Well, you just said something about dramatizing, some, emotional thing. And what's interesting to me, and I'm going to ask you this, people asked me, when they read my memoir, was writing it cathartic? And I said no. And I wonder if writing about loss, like loss of Charlie, in a novel form, what that did for you, if it did anything for. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think literally it didn't. I think it probably didn't. It didn't probably have that much effect literally, but in maybe a metaphorical way, because there is the novel and there is your memoir and my memoir, which go out to other people. You know,
Right.
so people write to both of us and they say that it meant something to them. And I can feel very melancholy and read a letter from somebody who said, your book changed my life. And I think, didn't change my life. It's, you know, that we can help other people, even sometimes when we can't help ourselves. So that's a positive thing.
Yeah. You know, I mean, what just happened with your the widow's tale, that the doctor from that hospital, God, there's thunder, that was just like a thunderclap
Yeah.
from God to emphasize what I was saying.
Yeah, it's like that's out here too.
But that doctor wrote you that incredible letter, and that your book had moved him to change the way they treated patients in the hospital. I mean, I thought,
Yeah, isn't that wonderful?
just astonishing.
Yeah.
You know, so
It's so wonderful that they've actually brought in a palliative care person
yeah,
in the hospital. Yeah, that's wonderful.
like tangible evidence that one's work has touched someone in a really meaningful and practical way.
Yeah, that's one thing we can be happy about.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm going to see if there's another question before the storm. Oh, somebody. Toni Morrison said she writes to understand. And Joyce, what is your motivation to write? Is it always the same, or is it varied?
Well, I think I have a sort of dramatist temperament too. I write the way Shakespeare was writing, to entertain and sort of exemplify heroic behavior or even evil behavior. I don't necessarily just write for my own understanding or satisfaction. It has more to do with reaching out to other people to dramatize. For instance, think of King Lear and how that dramatizes a certain element in our human experience that nobody else could have done but Shakespeare.
Right.
So looking at King Lear, it's a dramatic experience. We're sort of watching something, and I try to have that drama of it, a real adventure in my writing.
Yeah, I think you always do. And I was saying, by the way, when you were blacked out before, I was saying that you do take on very many different voices when you write. So many of your books are quite different than your other books. And so, you know, I like hearing that you feel that it's the dramatist in you, because that is a real, very basic thing, isn't it? As to why one would write, you know, to dramatize, to entertain, to offer something. Right?
Yes. Well, Michaela is very suicidal. And I think if suicidal people could dramatize their suicides, but dramatize them in an art form and look at them, they would then have gotten beyond the need to do it. You know, so she's so drawn to this canyon, not supposed to go when if it's raining because of flash floods. I think we've all been in canyons like that where you're hiking along, and if the sky gets dark and it rains, you might be drowned, you know, like in half an hour. So she has that experience in a sense, but then we turn the page and she's just reading about it. She's reading about it in a newspaper. So I like to work experimentally with dramatizing things that are possibilities for people, but they don't have to actually happen. They can be more like the fictitious possibility of committing suicide. If one could write about that honestly and then move past it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to, I don't know. I do think, I love the idea of what you said, that you're not just writing for yourself. And, you know, that they're not that you might consciously think of your audience, but you are thinking of something beyond yourself, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, sometimes, you know, if you're teaching, you get students to do things that they didn't think they could do.
right.
So you're like the instrument or the catalyst for students writing, say, really wonderful papers because you've sort of kind of made them do it, which they wouldn't have done otherwise. So that's something that they accomplish.
Yeah, and I know that you've been, as I said before, an amazing teacher to, I know some of your students, like A.M. Holmes is a friend of mine, and she, you know, and Jonathan Safran, for these people who you actually helped enormously in their work. I don't think people realize how generous you've been to other writers and young writers, and which is what you're talking about in your work, which is nice, that you want to give.
Well, it's lots of fun. I think it's thrilling.
It is fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's thrilling to work with a young writer, or not so young. I mean, just to take a text and work with it.
Yeah. I'm wondering if they're going to cut us off because it's 9 o'clock. I have no idea. I don't know if see, this is the problem with Zoom and everything, because I don't even know if there's anybody out there. It might be one person making up questions. I don't know. Beth, are you there?
I am. I'm here, Jonathan. Jonathan and Joyce, hello to you both. And I promise you there have been many, many people in tonight to enjoy this conversation and enjoy it. Oh my gosh.
Hi.
Oh, there's Lilith. Lilith, the beautiful cat. She looks so unhappy. So unhappy.
And Zanchi's not here. Zanchi's actually out in the rain.
Oh.
So what can I say? She's not too smart, I guess.
Oh my gosh. Well, that was a treat for, I think, everybody involved. I am unfortunately here to close us out tonight because we are beyond 9, but I want to thank you both, Jonathan and Joyce, for such an excellent conversation. And thank you both for being so flexible when our little tech glitch happened. Joyce, I will be keeping that voicemail you sent me, maybe for the rest of my days.
So pathetic.
No, I'm so sorry. I missed your call. I was calling your publicist.
And I'm so glad that Martin called. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Well, anyway, thank you to everybody out in the audience. Again, the link to buy the book, Breathe by Joyce Carol Oates, is in the chat. Also, check out Jonathan Sandlofer's work. His new book, I believe, comes out on the 17th. Yes?
Week, yeah.
I have other books of Jonathan's here. Yeah.
Definitely carried in stock at Politics and Prose Books and Books and Harvard Bookstore. While you're on our websites buying these excellent books, do check out our upcoming events because we put on events like these all the time and are, again, really happy to bring them to our communities. So from everybody at Politics and Prose, Harvard Bookstore, and Books and Books, thank you again. Stay well and stay well read, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Jonathan, Joyce, good night. Bye.
Good night, Joyce.